Welcome to Including the Excluded, Embracing Life Online as Disability Justice. I'm Denise Jansen, and it's an honor to host the panel today and to facilitate our conversation. Let me introduce to you the two speakers who are part of our panel. And I think they would say, and to welcome all of you as part of the panel as well as we have this conversation. Our first presenter is Dennis Heaphy. Dennis is a qualitative researcher and policy analyst at the Massachusetts Disability Policy Consortium. DPC is a Massachusetts-based disability rights advocacy organization committed to the civil and human rights of persons with disabilities. Much of Dennis's work focuses on increasing accountability of health insurance companies in advancing health equity through the operationalization of independent living philosophy and recovery model. He believes in the importance of assistive technology as a means of increasing opportunities to engage in the community and reducing isolation and loneliness. Dennis has a disability. He also holds a D.Min from Boston University, where he focused his studies on the practical implementation of spiritual care in managed healthcare system for elders and persons with complex disabilities. His previous work experience includes community and university chaplaincy work. Dennis serves on several state-level health policy committees and community nonprofit boards. Dennis is a commissioner on the Medicaid and CHIP Payment and Access Commission, and he holds a D.Min, an MDiv, a Master of Education and a Master in Public Health. Dennis, welcome. Our second panelist today, known to many of us, Dr. Annie Lockhart-Gilroy. She is Associate Professor of Christian Education and Practical Theology and Director of the Doctor of Ministry program at Phillips Theological Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She is a womanist pedagogue and ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church. Her work centers around the lived experiences of young people who've been systematically marginalized. She is the author of Nurturing the Sanctified Imagination of Urban Youth and co-editor of From Lament to Advocacy, Black Religious Education and Public Theology. She's currently working on two book projects on the topic of disability: Youthful Bodies, The Spiritual Lives of Young People with Physical Disabilities, which centers the voices of young people through qualitative research with physically disabled teenagers and young adults ages 13 to 30. The second project, My Body and Me, is a book of essays exploring the journey of befriending and learning to love one's continually disabling body. Through autoethnography, the essays tell pieces of Annie's autobiography and explore the challenges of missing the body that was and loving the body that is in an ableist society that is continually sending messages that bodies with chronic illnesses and disabilities are to be fought or pitied, not accepted and loved. Annie, thank you so much for dreaming up this panel. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Actually, let me give an opening question. So as we start, let's start with a quick conversation on terms, definitions. Let's get on the same page. There are various terms that people use to describe the same population: disabled persons, person with a disability, otherly abled. Which terms do you use? And I'll ask this to each of the panelists, and why. I also noticed distinctions with the disabilities that I read in the bios. Annie focusing on physical disabilities, for example. What are some introductory terms do you think we need to know as we frame this conversation? And I'll turn to Dennis first for this one.
Sure. I think we have to view disability as a social construct, and recognize that it's how people are perceived. And Eileen Daly will correct me if I'm wrong, but the Americans with Disabilities Act is very adamant at that point. It's a law that protects people who are perceived to have a disability or have a disability. And so perception is very much an aspect of how people with disabilities are understood. Um, uh, Someone with a mental health diagnosis might be considered a wise shaman or something in one culture, or you've got someone like I can't whistle, and there are cultures where whistling is central to communication, and so in that culture, I would be considered having a disability. And I know that in Latin American countries, folks who can't trill their R's often have to go for surgery, and on their tongue to make it possible for them to trill their R's. And so really, disability has such a broad understanding. Folks with cognitive impairments, or disabilities, Down syndrome, folks who might be the central to the lives of the family, not really considered disabled, they're considered the glue that holds the family together. Um, and, uh, and I think neurodiverse folks are actually shifting our understanding of disability, and that's folks who are autistic. And when I actually acquired my disability when I was in my early 20s, of spinal cord injury, um, and uh, and so for me, person-centered language is very important. I am a person with a disability, but for people who are autistic, it's more and more, I am autistic or I am disabled. And so not putting, not putting the person-centered language may not be as important. And so for me, I try not to be the PC police and say, you must say this. It's really the intent behind the language. And I also understand disability more broadly than physical, because in the work that I do and the people in my world are folks with mental health diagnoses, cognitive disabilities, folks with psychiatric or substance use disorder. So it's a broad swath of human experience. So I have to make sure within myself I'm conscious of me, especially as a person who works on healthcare policy, that I'm not just focused on my experience of disability, but incorporating the experience of other folks as well. I hope that wasn't too long of a description.
Not at all. That's great. Thank you so much.
Nope, certainly not too long. I did all of that and will just add a few things in talking about how I use terms. I use disabled person and person with a disability interchangeably. When referring to myself, I tend to say I have a disability or I am disabled. And that goes along for me the same kind of way I talk about the rest of my embodied identities. I am not one that says, I am a person that happens to be Black. I say I'm a Black person. I say I'm a woman as opposed to, a person that happens to be a woman. And there are people who say it other ways, and I'm not judging them, right? But my embodied identities for me recognize that it's a very important part of who I am, and in many ways define who I am, in part because of societal constructs, but also the way that I live my life every day, right? So, I mean, I've had chronic pain for most of my life. A few years back, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is which the symptoms are constant chronic pain, lack of energy, fatigue, chronic fatigue, brain fog, right? A variety of things that makes my ability to function requires particular things, right? I mean, we all require rest and comfort. If I am not extremely cognizant of those things, then my body stops moving. So every day, the first thing I need to do is take stock of my body and say, well, what are we doing today? Does my schedule need to change, right? Do I need to move things around? It very much shapes my life. I don't want to say control because that sounds bad, but it's what I have to work with, right? It very much shapes my life. So it becomes an identifying part of me. which I think is, so it's important for me to use that, name that, and be clear. I also don't want to police what other people say, but I do want to name how I hear some other things, right? When I hear things like differently abled, well, one, I think of superpowers. So, and while I've always wanted to be a superhero, and sometimes I think I am, I don't have those extraordinary powers, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that I have limits that other people don't have. I don't think that's wrong. I am not ashamed of it. It just is what it is, right? You know, and there's a variety of things in people's lives that creates that, like having small children, you know, like, so I kind of feel when I hear things like differently able, or someone actually heard someone say handy, capable, I feel like, oh, you're not too bad. And I'm like, I'm well aware of that. The you know, the last thing I need is a bigger ego. So like, so I don't necessarily need to feel like, don't think badly of yourself. I don't. I am a disabled woman just navigating this world. And because what I have is also seen as an invisible disability, most days people may never know. You know, like 99.9% of the time, when you see me, I'm in pain. I'm in pain right now. You wouldn't have known if I didn't tell you. Right. So I think that I think the framing of why I use the terms that I use also describes the way that I look at my embodied identities in general, that there are both they're societally constructed, and that also still makes it a thing, and they affect my everyday life. And me narrowing my work to physical disabilities was a way of also honoring that there are a variety of disabilities. They're not the same. And I wanted to look at embodiment. So.
But that's a good question, Annie.
Yeah.
That's a lot of the work I do. We engage folks from all different cultures, and some folks despise the word disability. If we put disability, like persons con discapacitados in Spanish, no one will respond at all. So we have to really talk about, like, do you have the X, Y, and Z needs, or do you? And so, and we find it also in like the African American community. So, in your experience, how might like other isms, other forms of discrimination actually exacerbate or impact your experience as an African American woman, a Black woman with a disability?
Well, I think it's just one of the ways that it impacts, and there's definitely all that intersectionality there, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I talk about my embodied identity, right? In which disability is one of them. One of the ways that I can think about it is doctor's visits, which I have quite a few of, right? If you look at various research that is out there, there is all sorts of medical bias, right? Doctors tend to give more pain meds to men instead of women, right? You also have this bias and this idea that Black people feel less physical pain, right? It's you know, research that was done with medical professionals that actually believe that Black people, they're just tough and they can feel less physical pain. There's also some chronic illnesses. Fibromyalgia is one of them. It's an illness that's done by negation, right? There is no test that says this is what you have. Some people question whether or not it actually exists, right? But it's really just a way to name, like, you have these things. When you put all of those things together, right? Let's pay meds because I'm a woman. And you know, you're Black, so you really tough it out. And the fact that I'm always in pain, finding good medical treatment is extremely difficult, right? And I think that's just one of the ways we see the intersections. I'm also from religious and, you know, somewhat conservatively religious family. And folks forever wanted to lay hands on me and pray. And I thank you. When you touch me in certain ways, it hurts. So stop. So, you know, and I think the navigation is always, I am going to try to recognize the spirit with which this has been given. And I am going to find a way to have a conversation that says, let's talk about that spirit in which this was given. Right? Why is this perceived as being nice, as opposed to condescending? I hope I answered your question there, but yeah.
No, you did. You did. I think for me, I look at even the word disability, and in the United States, in our context, that for Black folks, by definition, when people were put in mental hospitals or in institutions back in the day, Black people were by definition disabled, or because they were not fully considered to be fully integrated human beings, and therefore should be in a mental hospital or should not be able to procreate. And so there are layers of discrimination that come with the word disability. And so I think we need to incorporate those. And then what you were just saying, Annie, as well, about what does it mean to be made in the image of God? And I might roll into a room, people say, oh no, that's not the image of God. And they may say Annie, say, oh, she's in the image of God, or may not, depending on what their level of racism might be. But then when they find out, oh, Annie's got all these other things going on, say, oh no, she's not made in the image of God. And so like first they'll move from praying over me and move over to praying over Annie, or pray for both of us. And so like what's the idea of even praying over someone mean? So anyway, it's like really, I think, to contextualize disability as we've been saying, as a construct, but it's layers. It involves culture and religion and all these other aspects of what it means to be human and what the human experience is. And for each of us, it's individual, and it depends on how it's supportive the environment we're in is, and yeah, I don't want to go down that road. I don't stop talking. So let's just go with the questions.
Helpful ideas. Thank you. And I'm reminded of a book, My Body Is Not Your Prayer Request. That sort of takes that topic and further elaborates. So please.
I have to say that book in particular changed my life in so many ways.
Mhm.
And in part, one of the reasons that I claim it is because it took me a long time to claim disability. And I didn't because I thought that my needs weren't that bad, right? And there were people and they had far worse needs or more needs, right? And that text and the claiming of the body and seeing all bodies as perfectly and wonderfully made, and knowing the history of how a variety of different bodies have been X'd out because of the various embodiment features. So I highly recommend that book for everyone.
Just a little bit of a not separate. For me, I love when people with mental illness pray for me, because I feel like we're engaged in prayer together, as opposed to an able-bodied person who's doing something for me. That there's something unique that I experience with that person who may have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where we're engaged in something that's beyond the both of us, that's transcending the other. And so I think that's something very different. And yeah, so for me, that's my experience of being with someone we're both considered other, and yet in that moment we're really not. We're in that I thou moment. So for me, I love those experiences.
Indeed. Thank you. Well, let's turn a little bit to talk about the technology part of this. The way in which technology integrates or applies in a life. Let me just offer. So there's a variety of technologies, and we've been talking about a variety of disabilities. So let's turn and talk about those technologies. We've especially at this session, as part of our larger conference, we've been talking about virtual spaces. So maybe we start there and talk about the ways that virtual spaces, how they relate to access and accessibility. I wonder, just how do you think about the virtual space or technology as it relates to all of these issues? And Annie, why don't we start with you?
So I'm going to start with a story. And I feel very complex saying the following statement, but it's true. When we were shut down for COVID, that was one of the healthiest periods of my life. And I know how weird that, that sounds. I did get COVID and that wasn't fun, but I had gone the longest period of my life without a pain flare-up or an immobility flare-up. For the first time in my life, I realized that this wasn't just something that I sort of had to live with, right? And that's because my home has furniture for my body, right? We have designed a home that is comfortable for me. So there was no having to deal with these chairs are going to cause me pain, and then I'm going to deal with it, and I'm going to, and that was the first time that I realized that I didn't just have to suck it up for the rest of my life. And then 1.5 years of this lovely joy, and it's faculty retreat time, right? We go back in person. I can't remember if it's the fall of 21 or 22. It's probably 22. We're talking, doing all the faculty retreaty thing. The chair is uncomfortable. I stand, I stretch. I'm used to this. After all of this time with no pain flare-ups, one day, by the end of the first day, I couldn't drive myself home, right? So the dean drives me home. I know the drill, right? So I get myself together and I am back the second day. I'm not upset about it. This is just the way it is. And then we're having a conversation about the fact that we are back in person and the need to bring all things back in person. And we're talking about, is there a possibility to do a fully online degree? And I'm listening to someone say that being in person is extremely important. There's a reason why we are in person today. And it is so great that we are all in person and that we can all just, have that touch. And isn't this great? And I said, no, it's not. If I were at home, I would not be in pain right now. I recognize the value, right, of in-person spaces. But the idea that the not seeing how virtual spaces can be helpful for me was in that moment. And that was the first time that I was mad about my flare-up, because it was isn't this great? Well, the question, of course, is always for whom? And there certainly are a lot of articles, people are talking about different companies being called into work, right? A lot of people who got work during the time of everyone hiring remote workers can't go back to the office. Well, that was the reason they didn't work before, right? So there is a lot of accessibility in virtual spaces. So I think that was my first hint of this is about disability justice. This is about who are we including and who are we leaving out. Now, with every decision, we're including and leaving out different groups of people, right? The ideal thing would be to have just lots of options, but I think it's important to recognize the different ways that people have been able to participate. I had the most social calendar during lockdown, right? I didn't cancel a single birthday party. I didn't cancel a single hangout. And that's new for me. I'm at the point where I rarely make appointments and we're going to hang out, definitely, because I just got tired of canceling, right? I didn't have to choose whether or not I was going to go to church. It was just a matter of online or in person. So I'm thinking of the various ways that this provides access and opportunity. And if this did not exist, I would have continued to do all the things in person. I would have flown out for a conference, and then I would have in my schedule 2 days of recovery because I would know that I would not be able to move. I don't have to do that. And it's a beautiful thing.
But should I jump in?
On it.
I think what I heard you say, Andy, is about choice, and having your needs met. And for me, that's what I what I need a lot of other folks with disabilities really require. And for me, let me just go back to COVID and two different experiences of church. And one was Catholic church, my parish, and great, go on camera, and the cameras focused on the priest and the altar, and there aren't really many there aren't people. It's focused on the church and the sacraments. And then I also attend a Methodist church virtually, and that's all about inclusion. That's all about like opportunities for people to say amen, for people being on camera, and you can see folks on screen. And so it's really, people are not outside the sacred space. The sacred space is brought in to the space everyone's at, whether it's virtually or in person. And for me, that's such a wonderful, healthy experience of sacred space, because it's physical and it's virtual at the same time. And so folks who are not in that physical space don't need to be, because they're engaged, and the parents are saying amen. Let's hear from the folks online, and let's and singing, you name every aspect of the worship experience is inclusive, and there's no sort of exclusion of who's physically present and who's not. I think for me, moving out of that really wonderful experience as an advocate, virtual has also become a safe space for bureaucrats to hide behind. And so it's easier to say no to someone when they're not physically in the room. And so what we've found in the work that we do, that it's very convenient for more folks to engage and to be involved, but that bureaucrats can just hide behind that. Okay, the Zoom session is over, and now we're going to just, like, we'll bring this up next time. And so hybrid is very much a central piece of what we're pushing for right now, is ensuring that there's opportunity for both, as in the church experience, the ability to have both, because as for the Catholic experience, it's easier for the priest to just focus on the people that are in that church, and then really not purposely, but to exclude folks who are online. And what does that mean? That what the folks are not able to engage online in the same way in the Catholic church that they go to versus the Methodist church. And so it's really, it's a huge issue, a huge opportunity. I think we're still working our way through it. And I'm grateful for the hybrid program that BU had that enabled me to do my DMin, because I wouldn't be able to do it without that hybrid, or or an online program as well, like just to have that space. Because like Annie said, and we're not supposed to admit these things, but it does take time to recover from doing things in person. And so so I really think it's like as Annie was saying, it's choice, and it's having both, and embracing technology as a means of of uh, of uh, of being community, and doing it well. I think it's doing it well. That's what we're working on right now, is doing community well in that in that space.
Yeah, I think you made some good points that it's not just about turning on the camera, right? Like in the same way where online teaching didn't mean do what you do in person and just put it online. There had to be some changes. And I think it's the same with gathering virtually, right? Because like you, I've seen the worship services where there really is no difference between whether it's Zoom or Facebook or watching it on TV, right? Like you are, you're kind of passive and you're kind of outside, right? Versus those who have a virtual pastor, someone who is connected in the chat, right? Having conversations, someone who's taking requests, like creating that extra community that like kind of turn on the camera is not enough. And I'm also wondering, Dennis, that if all of the, not if, what will you think all of the ability to connect online is also doing in terms of losing that in-person contact, right? So, I mean, me being a very strong introvert, I just came off a sabbatical and I joked with some colleagues that, no, you'll see me, because my fear is that I'm just going to turn into a recluse, right? And I'm not rich enough to be eccentric, so I'm just going to be really, really weird. So that I have to kind of like force myself just to remain in this social space. And then you're adding the fact that it is physically demanding. So I'm wondering with folks that you've spoken to and work with, are there ways in which virtual spaces are giving community and isolation at the same time?
Again, I think it's how well it's done, and having choice. For folks with mental health diagnoses, during COVID, many people who would not join a certified peer like specialist group, would not engage with other people because of stigma, would go online anonymously and be in these spaces. And that opened up opportunity to actually become more engaged in community, and then opportunity to engage in person with people, having made that initial step into being in a virtual space with other folks. So I think it's both. For some people, touch is extremely important. I'm thinking for folks with some disabilities, let's say Down syndrome, or where touch is so like engaging, and being with people might be really important. Where folks who are autistic, maybe that virtual space is safer. And so I think we also have to look at ourselves as folks with disabilities, as individuals, and say, when am I engaging in virtual space as a way of continually to be isolated and not fully engaged? And when am I engaging in like in-person physical space to show I'm tough and I can be like anyone else? Or what, like I need to know for myself when I'm engaging in either space, for reasons that are life-giving, as opposed to making it easy. Like, it's much easier to be on Zoom, because I don't know how many of us here may be typing away, looking at something else as we're listening, and so it's easier not to be fully engaged when we're online than I think we're in person. So there's a level of integrity in our own personal identities, and knowing which is better for us, and which is going to really help us to engage in a fuller authenticity, more authentically with others. And so I don't know if it's either, I don't know if I answered your question, but for me,
Yeah.
it's what, yeah.
Good.
What does embodiment look like in a virtual space?
So that's an interesting question for me, because in one way I would answer it by saying, you know, it's interesting because we're all sort of kind of like Max Heldrum, right? For those 80s kids out there, right? We're just kind of the head in the box. You know, I'm sure we have these experiences of knowing students through these little boxes, and then seeing them in person and being like, oh, okay, you're a lot taller than I thought, right? Like, or, you know, like something just isn't jarring, right? I also know when we talk about embodiment and the importance of embodiment and being together, I also think it's important to state that, you know, I mean, we all still have bodies, right? And my embodiment is not dependent on your gaze. So even if you can't see my body at all, even if what you see is an avatar, I am still in a body, speaking with you, being in relationship with you. And your gaze doesn't make it so, right? I also know that for many who deal with microaggressions for a variety of reasons, spaces are easier when folks are texts and an avatar, right? Or, you know, or a voice. If the issue is race, then you can't sometimes tell through a voice, right? Gender is a little different with that. But I think it's important to recognize that for many people, being in person in different spaces is not safe space. So caring for self then also means that I might be an avatar for this class, right? I might take more online classes that deal with typing in my responses, because that way all the men in the room don't cut me off, right? I might want to do all of these different things. And I say men in the room, again, statistically speaking, women tend to get cut off more, right? So I think embodiment in a virtual space is varied, right? How much we see of each other, recognizing that the other is still fully embodied, even though we just see the head, right? And recognizing the consent to share, you know, to share what you see of me when I want you to see of me, right? I have to do a lot of stretching in you know, in public, for example. It's strange, you know. I mean, I do it, most people don't care, but I do get looks, right? When I'm on Zoom, I turn my camera off and then I do what I need to do, and then turn my camera back on, right? So there's a joy of consent and agency in there, because, you know, that the body doesn't exist just for other people's gaze, if that makes sense.
And as you're talking, the first, which I'm glad you brought up avatars. There's a documentary on Netflix about a young man who passed away. If someone remembers the name of this documentary, please put it in the chat. But that he was embodied in virtual space, but really disembodied in the physical space with his family. His family and folks around him really didn't know him as an embodied person, as Imago Dei. But people online did. And when as his avatar and his experience engaging with folks, because it didn't require his physical body to be able-bodied, he was able to be fully himself online in a way he was not able to be with his family, where he was nonverbal. But online, they just said like typing, and he had this full life online that people only discovered after he passed away. And so for embodiment I mean, doesn't necessarily necessitate physicality as much as it's about how we are in ourselves, experience ourselves fully imago Dei. And people are experiencing us as imago Dei. And so so for me, I think, and when I think of embodiment that way, that technology, the virtual spaces can provide that for us in ways that we've not had in the past. And so how do we embrace that or be embraced by that is something I think we're really learning how to do right now. And it's going to take us a while to learn how to do it well and not to have it be exploited or exploitable. We've done some research on, and this goes back to what you were saying, Annie, about being cut up by men, and we did this very small project with women in Second Life, and I wasn't part of it because I helped with some of the design of it, but I was not engaged in the research itself because as a man, it wasn't my space to do that. But it was just a place for women with disabilities to be with each other, and their avatars, and to share experiences and have that safe space. And so for these women, there was that embodiment that they had there, that they don't necessarily always have in the quote unquote physical world. Yes, I think that's I just thought it's like, and when we think about it, we actually have a virtual relationship with God, because we don't have this physical quote unquote person sitting there, and so much of experience of God is virtual. But it really is not virtual in the sense that we are fully embodied. I think most of us fully embodied. We are engaged with God, and that's something that makes that really shifts the conversation about what it means to be virtual and full relationship. I don't know. I'll stop at that.
Thank you. Thank you both. Let's shift a little bit. We've been talking in this gathering, focused a lot on generative AI, and that cutting edge technology that we're all teasing. In what ways do you see things like chatbots and other forms of generative AI aiding people with disabilities? Are there any concerns?
Well, I'll just say, right, we learned about concerns yesterday from Elon Musk when all that anti-Semitic crap was just spewing all over the internet. So that is dangerous. AI only reflects who we are as people, and so AI is nothing more than a way of expanding on in faster time what we believe or put into it. So it's no more than holding up a mirror image of who we are, or who the powers that be are. And so AI is I don't think AI is magical as people think it really is, as we learned yesterday from Musk. And also there was a ChatGPT, the creators of it were at Howard University, and they were talking about how there were still racist things and problems with ChatGPT, espousing their racist tropes, and how do they make sure that the AI, the algorithms, are not perpetuating discrimination. AI is a tool that we've created that we can use for ill or for good, just like the Gutenberg press. So I don't know, Annie.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think about is chatbots as community members. And I will admit that I would have answered this a lot differently on Sunday. But some of these papers are messing with my mind. How dare you make me learn and consider my thoughts? But the idea of chatbots as community members for people who are isolated, maybe because of mobility issues and concerns, right? I don't know what I think about these things, so I'm just going to ask the questions. Can chatbots be friends? Can they be companions? Can they make one feel less isolated? Can the non-humans who may or may not be persons, what is that role of bringing folks into community? And because chatbots can simulate conversations, right? So, you know, I could put in stuff about me and have ChatGPT put in stuff about you, and then practice a conversation with you, Dennis, on ChatGPT, right? So if we can have this kind of conversation, then what does that also mean for those who are often ostracized because they're neurodivergent, right? A conversation with another, you know, that isn't shaming, that isn't, well, it might be, because again, AI is based on us, but can adapt eventually. Does that become a more inclusive community? And I don't have answers, so I just leave those questions and I think about the possibilities. So Dennis, in one of our previous discussions when we were putting this together, you said, you know, the printing press allowed for the rise of Protestantism, right? And you wondered what AI would allow for the rise of. Other than my knee-jerk reaction, because I watched too many movies being like, you know, robot takeover, right? But other than that, what are the possibilities out there? And I think especially about, because there are chatbots that are meant to be your therapist, meant to be your friend, meant to give you encouragement. And I think about what that means for those whose disabilities leave them more isolated.
I think, and also there was a question by Dean in the chat that I thought was intriguing, and I don't want to speak for all people who are autistic, but for many people who are autistic, engaging directly with chatbots or engaging directly with computer interfaces is very freeing and life-giving, because it can be challenging to engage with folks who are or not and so I just thought I was saying, because someone just made a comment about being autistic, and I don't want to speak for anyone in the community, but they said something about it's like wearing eyeglasses, and I think that's a really interesting analogy, that the chatbots for all these virtual interventions, they're nothing more than advances in our technology that enable us to engage the way eyeglasses enable us to engage. I think that's really intriguing to think about it that way, that AI and all that we're engaging with this brave new world are really just tools that are more advanced than the tools we have right now that enable us to engage with each other in new ways. And it's a little bit A friend of one of my, he was actually my best friend with a disability, was nonverbal, and it was very challenging to communicate because we had to do it by um might be spelling all of a sudden spell out the alphabet ABCDE and then go back and stick out his tongue and then but now there are all these technologies, alternative augmented communication access for folks with complex or nonverbal, and it's like they never spoke a word in their life, but now just using this machine, they're able to speak. And folks who were silenced or thought not to have a perspective or a voice now actually have voice because of this technology. And so going back to what was said about autism and AI and these technologies, it is, I definitely can see how this is at least another means of communicating or opening up the toolbox we have for folks to communicate or engage with each other and to be more human and be in community and be people of God in ways that we have not considered yet. And so if we think of the arc was the arc of justice or the arc of time bends towards justice, that these new technologies can enable us to actually do that. And so my friend Jim, who was brilliant, if he'd had this technology today, like what his life would be like. And so and I work with kids with complex medical needs, and how excited they get when they're actually able to say something using this technology, and share their perspectives, what they want, what they don't want, to say like I have a choice, or I have an opinion, and no one would have ever thought that to ask them before, because that technology wasn't there. And so I think it may actually be a way of us to better engage with folks who are autistic, and for folks who are autistic to share with folks who are neurotypical folks, what their perspectives and needs are in ways we wouldn't have been able to do before. And that's exciting. And I just thought at this time, as you said that, it really made me think, yeah, I think that's a possibility. So anyway, I digress.
You actually did digress. You took us into our next conversation point. And you hit on it a bit. I'll just go forward with it. That there are forms of technology, various forms that are embedded within bodies, right? Whether we talk pacemakers, prosthetic limbs, neural implants, I think you talked about. There's, a variety of examples. And we are seeing technology more and more be merged with humanity, as in like within the body, right? And this has caused, folks to name it, because, academics like to term things. So, people talk about cyborgs or transhumanism or post-humanism, the way that technology and humanity, or the way that technology and bodies work together. So let's discuss various ways that these terms are used in disability studies. For the most, all in all, we're seeing all of these. Most of this is medical technology, and it is seen as good, right? Like I find it interesting that this is also talked about in terms of post-human or transhuman, because like you said, it is allowing people to enter into community as, in some ways, just human, right? It's not post-human to walk, right? Like that's, so one with prosthetic limbs, that's what it's allowing the person to do. And as much as I like the idea of being a cyborg, right? The pins in my body and different things in my body aren't necessarily giving me extra strength. So I'm just wondering how you take some of these terms that are often used.
I I I don't think I think these tools make us more human, and whether they're enable us to engage in our humanity in ways that we may never have imagined before. That goes back to the idea of 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 virtual spaces and other technology being a new tool for folks to engage with each other that we didn't have in the past. And so and all of us are now here engaging with each other online in a virtual space. Um, and so what's it like using computers? And what would be the difference between having the computer sitting on a desk as opposed to having an implant in our brains? Doesn't make us any less human. Might make it easier for us to engage with each other in ways we could have never imagined. I think what may be scary for folks is the idea that it may reduce our humanity, because we might have an implant uh, that would enable us to engage with folks, and like how might that implant be used by nefarious folks to control us and dominate us? But I think that conversation has been going on since the first person took a hammer and 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 took it rather than or took a stick rather than use it to create fire. It beat someone over the head and killed them. And so like technology is good and ill. So I'm not afraid of implants, where others might be afraid of them, because if it's going to support my ability to engage and be in community in ways that I may not have imagined in the past, then I'm going to embrace that. And and ways of experiencing the beauty of the world, um, that like for me, uh, like to be in a I'd love to be able to be, I can't physically go to another place because of my body, but to be able to be kind of like on Star Trek, they had those the deck, the holodeck, and people could actually experience and be in this space where they're feeling and living another reality. I think that's exciting. And so I don't know we'll ever transcend humanity. I just hope that whatever we do brings us closer to God, and that if we're moving in that direction of becoming more, these are all actually gifts from God to bring us closer in relationship with God and with one another, then I think it's exciting. And I don't know, for me, I don't know what the terms are right now, but I do think it's about how do we as as folks interested in religious education, how do we engage in conversations about this technology and disability, and say, how does this make us more, bring us closer to in relationship with each other and with God, and how can we shape these tools as gifts that support uh, the fuller embodiment of people with disabilities in community, in ways that we'd never considered before. So it's breaking down barriers. And I also, and this is something that's like, I don't think that 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 someone with intellectual disability should all of a sudden have to be uh, uh, I don't want us to be all the same. I want to lift up our differences and the different ways, the gifts that disability can bring to spaces because of the different ways of being human. And so if technology is going to wipe that out, that for me is not bringing us closer to God, because I think it's about the diversity of human experience that brings us closer to God and to one another. So I think one of the challenges we have is how do we do this in a way that does lift up and embrace difference and recognize that we are the more we celebrate unity and diversity, that'll be great. But to make us all just chatbots would be frightening for me.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I don't think it's necessary to talk about being transhuman or transcending humanity. I think the diversity is the great thing. And I also think that means that it's important to not see the technology as fixing an individual as much as giving the individual different options. And recognizing that it's perfectly fine for someone to say, I do not want that technology a part of me. There are many within the deaf community, for example, where, we don't want cochlear implants, right? It's not wrong with being deaf. We're gonna, continue with that. And I say more power to you, right? So, and then there are those who will fight that, be like, no, life is easier if this way, so you should do it this way. Well, life might be easier if I was another race and color, but I'm not changing that. So it's all about accepting the many different ways in which we were wonderfully made. And I also don't necessarily separate the technology that may be in one's body versus the technology one uses. And there are some, of course, there's always diversity of opinion. There are some who would say that the cane they use, their walking cane, is a part of them.
Yeah.
What they use to move around is a part of them. I don't feel like my cane is a part of me. I use it. I appreciate it. I actually, give all of my canes a name. They're in the cane family. So we got Citizen, Sugar, Candy. But so I have a whole cane family. But I don't see it as a part of my body. But there are those that do, and I tend not to make a distinction between, technology within, technology without.
I think it was Hannon online talked about having virtual Passovers. And so they just actually blew my mind, because I was thinking that Jewish folks are the story of diaspora. And so always it's a story of folks engaging and maintaining culture and community identity virtually, often, and that what's that, holding on to identity, and how the virtual spaces can actually strengthen people's ability to maintain their identity and what makes them unique and special, and children of God in ways that may not have existed before. So again, building on that idea, we are community.
I was the one that said that. I'll just jump in that we were not able to have a family Seder for about 10 years because we weren't together on Passover, and we figured out how to come together in a way that we'd never come together before, and it was wonderful. It was an amazing experience.
Yep. I think that and it's unique to the history of Judaism and the Jewish people to be able to come together like that, because that is, I think, in many ways, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the story of Judaism is people coming together in places that are virtual. And so, yeah, I think that's very, very poignant. And going back to Annie and her experience of being able to engage in birthday parties or gatherings and doing all those things in ways that may not have been possible before, or all of us not having to gather in one place in the United States, which would have excluded a lot of people from being able to participate. And now we're actually all able to be here together. And so I think that's, again, we are living right now, this moment, that experience of God and one another virtually, which is very, very intense, very intense. And someone just said they need to go to the next session. So I don't know, is our time up? I've not looked at my clock.
We do still have some time, and
Okay.
I want to invite, if there are others in the room today who have questions or want to raise topics, we would welcome, you can either put that in the chat or you can raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you for those. As I was reflecting on what we were saying about AI and the rise of what it seems like in both cases, the printing press, the rise of Protestantism, AI, and the rise of whatever, that both are movements toward agency. And disability can feel empowering. The word invalid, literally invalid.
Right.
Painful words that can be used. And I wonder how we think about the opportunity to give agency toward reinstate agency or to expand agency for those who might have had it limited by a culture that doesn't understand.
Someone mentioned gaming, and I've been pushing gaming. The insurance company should cover gaming for folks with complex disabilities or isolated or alone, because through the avatars, through those systems, people can gain more agency and have a better sense of identity. Like I'm engaging with friends, I'm being competitive, I'm being like engaging in things that I may not have been able to do, and then might that actually enable me to do this beyond just in the virtual world, but in person with other people, not necessarily required. But there's a great documentary on PBS about a group of folks, African American guys from the state hospital in New York City, and how gaming brought them together, and this virtual world created a community, not just in New York City, but international. And so there is I think a sense of agency that the technology brings. And as I said, the kids in these classrooms who were not able to communicate before now have a sense of agency to say, no, I don't want this, I want that. And that's really powerful, to be able for kids to express what they want or don't want, and they were not able to do that before.
And I think it also goes again to what I was saying about the choice of various technologies, the choice of treatments, the choice of being clear that for many with disabilities, it's not about being fixed. They're not broken, right? Like we're not broken. But we can do particular things if we so choose to make other things easier or smoother, and that it shouldn't be about, let's try to make you more like other people, but about how do you want to move in this world? And I think that is the question we want to focus on, right? How do you want to move or not move in this world? And for you, for example, it means, for a deaf person getting a cochlear implant, cool. For a deaf person not getting a cochlear implant, cool. Right? How do you want to move in this world?
I'm sorry, I jumped in. Didn't mean I'm like, wow, I'm trying to pay attention to the chat. And the digital divide is a huge issue, and one we need to look at from a social justice perspective, not just for folks with disabilities, but for folks who are lower income and or live or isolated. And how do we make sure that these technologies, the software, all this is available to everyone, and not just a few. And that's a major concern. And then Hannon made another really great comment about how the technologies enable his son to participate in Friday services in ways that accommodate his need, but might not have been available. And I think as I consider that statement, how great it is, and also we have to realize that technology does not let us off the hook for finding other ways of being together physically, and not just expecting um, not just expecting technology to solve all our problems, or to be the answer to everything. Because sometimes the tough solutions actually come from us engaging with each other in the same space and saying, no, we need to figure out how to ensure everyone is welcome, whether it's virtually or in person. And that I think it's we need to wrestle with those things.
The question about the technology divide also makes me think about how expensive it is to have certain disabilities. And it differs from society to society. We have many countries represented here. But it can be extremely costly in and of itself, right? And as the hope is that everyone is given the opportunity to have digital technology as a form of social justice, that there's also the recognition that those from poor working class backgrounds, those who don't have particular finances, are often in pain or more isolated than those who do. I mean, which is not surprising, right? But it does bring to mind for me when talking about intersectionality that socioeconomic class is a huge divide in general, and a huge divide in terms of those with disabilities, because it can be pricey.
Yes.
I'd throw in two other issues of divides along with the socioeconomic divides. One is age. Those of us that are older have a tougher time dealing with new technologies than those that are younger, and having accommodation and instruction and assistance in using all these technologies that would be extraordinarily useful for people as they get older is great. And another is religious orientation. We have in Israel a large ultra-Orthodox population, which has a whole variety of issues with regard to the use of technology. And during the pandemic, for example, when everybody else went on Zoom, they didn't go on Zoom because they didn't have computers at home, because they didn't allow computers at home. Because they didn't allow computers at home, they actually didn't know that they had a hard time learning about the ways in which COVID could be transmitted. And so there were lives lost because we hadn't figured out how to accommodate. Eventually, actually, one person spoke to the son of one of the ultra-Orthodox rabbis, explained it to him, who explained it to this fellow, who realized what the mistake they were making, and they began to find ways to accommodate. But I don't think that's only true of that particular religious community. I think it's true of a lot of conservative religious communities, and we need to think about how to adjust the availability of technology in order to include those communities as well.
Yes. Thank you for that comment. I also want to bring in Dean. Dean, if you want to speak to what you put in the chat about risking associating humanist embodiment in ways that constantly bolster medical model of true bodies.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I type
No,
as
no, I think it's a great comment. No.
so I said no prayer. I mean, I think part of this is really fascinating and the intersection, and Annie here, I love that language, the language of intersectionality here between this conversation around disability and theology, as it maybe in some ways helping us expand our understanding of humanness and embodiment over time. And for me, and I say this with a lot of caution, I remember early both learning the strong contributions of feminism, but also reading early womanist thinking in a way in which it kept expanding the horizon that way as opposed to contracting it. So, part of me is just appreciative of how this conversation is just helping us I think even in our language of what do we mean by human, over and against the technology. So I hope you hear that. And I do always believe technology functions best inside the conversation of theological anthropology. That's just a general observation, since it is an extension of our humanness,
Yes.
is basically the best way to understand what technology is designed. It's not to become God or to invade into other forms of theological discourse. So those are just observations. My apologies to the rest of the group. It's just a way I think that I'm appreciating what I'm hearing today more than anything else. So.
Thanks for that, Steve.
I think those are great comments and insights. And it made me also think of how womanist theology, and you speak far better, but I I love womanist theology compared to like like for me as a person with disability, there are things in womanist theology that resonate for me that don't resonate for me in feminist theology. And so there's something unique to that voice that even though it's not my lived experience, there's something in that voice that's really really important. And so I just for Annie, I guess building over Dean's question or comment is as you know, as a womanist theologian, and a person with a disability, how does this speak to you? You know, and your concept of God as a person with a disability and a womanist theologian.
Yeah, as a womanist pedagogue. Yeah, I mean, I think what really connects with me first is that starting with the reality of lives, right? Of lived lives. And then asking how God relates, how God works, how God moves in this living. And that connects directly to the way that many people think about disability theology, right? That it is theological anthropology, but it's also and it's also let's talk about lived experiences. Let's name it, let's discuss it, let's center it, right? It's not an antidote. Let's center it and then see how God moves, talks, and is here for this particular population. It is extremely connected and has similar methods. They're also both from, populations that have been told, well, if you just ... right? Which comes down to, if you just become a completely different person, everything will be fine, right? But instead saying, this is the way that God has made me. And the problem is not race, the problem is racism. The problem is often the problem isn't disability, it's ableism, right? So there's all of these connected methods and methodologies that I think just, I can see how it resonates for you because there's so much, it's approached similarly in so many ways.
And also it's something that and it's prompted by what Dean said, what Hannon said, what we're talking about, and that is people our lived experience shaping the theology now. And where 20 years ago the panel would have been two able-bodied theologians, probably white people, talking about the experiences of other people without having any lived experience of what that truly means, but it being from the perspective of the other and the powers that be, the hegemony for voice, and so that even now that our voices are here and being shared, and we're doing that virtually, I think is really something to think about, to pause and say, wow, what does this mean in terms of equalizing people's voices virtually in ways that would not have happened in the past.
Right.
I'm seeing a comment from Nick in the chat. I wonder, Nick, if you want to voice your voice your comment?
Sure. Hi, friends. I'm Nick, he, him, doctoral student at the Cloud School of Theology and Ministry of Boston College. I do a lot of queer theology, and so thinking about flourishing as embodied particularity, and that just Daniel Horan, Franciscan, I believe, who does this retrieval of John Duns Scotus's like Hakeitos, the thisness, where the image of God isn't necessarily something that is this universal substance that we all have, but like it made manifest in individual particularity and distinctiveness and uniqueness. That the image of God, like that we don't want to flatten the image of God by shrinking down our differences and our uniqueness. And it's that not a glorification of pain and suffering, but I think very much what you both have been discussing this entire time, and just thinking about that overlap in the queer theology that I do with this, the particularity of that anthropology and the beauty of that. Thanks.
There's this whole framework in the disability movement on queering disability. And so it's like, rather than trying to normalize disability, valuing disability, as not making disability fall into some normative framework, but queering it to embracing all the varieties, all the differences that are there. So I did a bunch of reading on this stuff, and it's just so we don't become just everyone needs to have a job and get married and have like X, Y, and Z things that like that are, we're all moving towards this normative experience of what it means to be fully human. I think Dean is speaking that a little bit as well, but if anyone's interested is queering disability, there are a few great books about that. And so I highly recommend, because it'll help to keep us from falling into that trap of trying to make disability or people with disabilities fit into some normative structure. So very much appreciate that comment. Yeah, very much appreciate that. And technology can lead us to that, as we've seen with like Microsoft Word and other programs, where there's only one way of doing things. And if you don't put in the exact right word or phrase, you're not going to get the answer you need. So yeah, I very much appreciate that we need to do that. Yeah. So thank you for raising that.
I'm gonna say ditto and give space for one more question.
If someone has just one more topic or question, we have time for just one more probably.
And so what are your thoughts? You do a lot of work in this space.
Well, I'm
You
more,
did an article
I'm
with-
more thinking about a friend who died 10 days ago, who had his colon and 2/3 of his ileum removed when he was 20 because of Crohn's. And he was told he'd live till he was 40, and God bless him, he made it to 65. But the impact of the medications and all that it took to keep Fritz alive came at a social cost for him. As my friends have sort of gathered, as we've all shared the news with each other that Fritz passed. He recently, 5 years ago, after his mother died, moved from Boston to outside of Syracuse. And people were like, why'd he run off like that? He didn't tell any of us. He just kind of disappeared and lost touch. And come to find out, from the one or two he stayed close to, it was too hard for him to maintain the kind of social conversation engagement because of the effect the medications were having on him, and just the rundownedness. Like he had to plug into an IV every night to stay nutritioned. And so I don't know. Maybe all I'm doing is calling for an awareness of the multiplicity of factors for all of our friends who are experiencing any kind of physical or mental disability. It's easy to forget. It's easy to lose track. It's easy to not notice and to just project my own issues on why Fritz moved to Syracuse. And so all of that was just a way of saying, and remember to love each other. Amid all of the technology, amid all of the tools, medication and otherwise, that are out there to support systems, I just kind of want to, I don't know, my inclination in this moment is to love Annie and love Dennis and stay in touch and all that.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end it.
Thank you, Eileen, for that lovely summation. I appreciate your insights always. Well, this has been a generative conversation. Thank you so much for engaging it. I want to invite you to join me in thanking our presenters for their good work among us. Please, let's give them a virtual hand of applause.